Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're having an information session today, building partnerships with First Nations public libraries. And we have a few special guest speakers with us. I'd like to introduce Dr. Sabrina Redwing Saunders, who is the CEO of our Blue Mountains Public Library. Feather Miracle, who is the current CEO of the Six Nations Public Library, and Karen Foster, who is the former CEO of the Chippewas and Georgina Island First Nations Public Library. And today we'll be talking about how FOPL is addressing truth and reconciliation within its own organization, what support through partnerships look like, and how to implement truth and reconciliation within our public libraries, and important first steps that you can take as public libraries yourselves. And of course, what that support looks like at the various administrative levels through reciprocal programs and via formal partnerships. So first we have Dr. Sabrina Redwing Saunders, who will be starting us off.
So I am Sabrina. I am also the vice chair with FOPL and a member of our Indigenous Library Partnership working group. So really happy to be here and for FOPL to be doing this session. We'll certainly be taking Q&A at the end. So I hope that we'll have some good discussion when we're finished with this. So my task first is to look at truth and reconciliation in our public libraries. And what has FOPL been doing to support that? So like many of our larger organizations, FOPL has passed a resolution some time back accepting and endorsing the report that came out of CFLA a number of years back. And if you haven't read that, it is something that is attached on our website as one of our resources. And we'll be making sure that that's something that is on the area with this session again for those that can't find it. But that particular report is important because it addresses the calls to action. And what we've done is we've looked at those larger 94 calls to action and then that CFLA report, which really translated how our public libraries and the library sector could be using those calls to action in library areas. So it's really easy to say, well, you know, that's a medical issue, or that's a policing issue, or that's a this issue. But when we started to look at it, you really can find a home for a library and so many of those pieces. So FOPL as a support system for our public libraries and as an advocacy body for our public libraries has looked at that so that we're building directly into that for our strategic plan, making sure that we are supporting our libraries in all ways that they need supports in, as well as looking as us as an actual organization and what we're going to do for truth and reconciliation. So this is one of those pieces, making sure that we're supporting our public library members to find out how you fit in truth and reconciliation, how you can partner with a First Nation library. And a partnership, I will add, is a two-way reciprocal aspect. So not to simply call the First Nation library and say, what should we be doing? But saying, how can we work together? How can we grow together? How can I support what you are doing and you can support what I'm doing so that we both together are working to support our Indigenous members of the community, as well as Joe Canadian, who needs to know the aspects of truth before they can step forward into reconciliation. So FOPL is really looking forward to continuing to build our strategic plan and our annual working plans on this. We look for your feedback, so you can always go to our website and see what our priorities are. If you think of things that we should be doing, you know, we look to our members to give us feedback and support on areas that you think that we need. Certainly our working group, the Indigenous Libraries Partnership, which is made up, and Feather is our chair of that, but the Indigenous Libraries Partnership being made up of First Nation public librarians, First Nation libraries. So there are many of us that are First Nation librarians that are not working in reserve communities anymore. And then our public library staff working together to be able to build reconciliation and strong communities. So we look forward to continuing on this area and seeing what our libraries can do to make some social change start to happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Karen will now talk to us a little bit about what the partnership looked like with the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation Public Library looked like.
Well, I'm just going to talk a little about First Nation partnerships, partnering with non-native public libraries. We started out with Chippewas of Georgina Island. We did a partnership originally with Pickering Public Library, and that was a reciprocal partnership where we would they would ask what we would need help with and within our library, whether it be books or programming or just any time they could give. And in return, we would do things with them reciprocally, like give them ideas on programming and First Nation materials, where to get certain materials. They could pick our brains for how we would do different things within our community. Then it went forward, and we've always had a partnership, a relationship with Georgina Public Library, the library system, be it the Pefferlaw or the Sutton or the Keswick branch. And that started with them asking if they could come and visit us. So we said, sure, we're always open to having people come to the island. So they came to the island and we gave them a tour of the island, of our First Nation, and of our library, which, you don't need it's quite a small library, so it wasn't a big tour. And then we sat down and just visited and talked to them about our community and how we ran the library. And then we did an exchange of information with them, and they wanted to see what our collections were, and they decided that they were going to give books, gently used books from their overflows to help increase our collections in the library. And then during First Nation Public Library Week, my colleague and I would go to the Keswick Library or Pefferlaw or Sutton, and we would give just an information to all the library's patrons. We would talk about life on the island, and we would give a beading class or do some sort of thing to increase awareness of what we do as a First Nation and awareness of ourselves and what the Chippewas of Georgina Island actually is. Because believe it or not, people in the general public, and we're not far from Keswick or Sutton or Pefferlaw, we're just 15 minutes by boat. But some of the questions were like, what kind of food do you eat? What kind of houses do you live in? Things like that. Like, people are just not culturally, educated about a First Nation and what exactly happens on a First Nation. So another thing that would be helpful if you do get a partnership or forge a relationship with a non-native library is to share your experiences. Go out during First Nation Public Library Week. And if you're a regular public library, reach out to the First Nation libraries surrounding you. See if they can come and do something during First Nation Public Library Week, or just, to communicate with them so that there's a better understanding between people. so that there's not that prejudice, not prejudice, but like people have blinders about First Nation people and what happens on a First Nation. Like the question said, like they didn't, some of the little kids thought that we didn't even eat food like normal people, that it was a different, you know. And I said, we shop at the same grocery stores and everything else. So to me, that's part of truth and reconciliation, is to build a relationship between First Nation people and non-Native people so that we can all understand each other better and have a true understanding of how we are as a people. And if there's any questions or any other ideas people might have on how to approach anybody or to form a relationship with another library, I'm more than happy to answer questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karen. It was wonderful that you were able to offer them opportunities to ask questions in an open and safe space, so that way they could just have some of these maybe myths or more sensitive topics kind of put out of the way there. So that's great. Thank you. Next, we have Feather Miracle, who's going to be telling us a little bit more about her partnerships.
Thank you for that. I'm very honored and grateful to be on this panel with Karen and Sabrina. Yes, I sit on the FOPL board, and I am also the chair of the Indigenous Libraries Partnership Working Group. And I am going to talk a little bit more about library to library partnerships. So in taking over this library, one of the first things that I did was to establish a reciprocal borrowing agreement. And that was done first with the Brantford Public Library, shortly followed by the County of Brant Public Library System, and then Hamilton Public Library. And these partnerships, are extremely important. Here on Six Nations of the Grand River, there's not a high school, so all of the students here get bused to the surrounding communities, and students in school need access to libraries and library material. Previously, without these borrowing agreements in place, students would have to pay for a membership so that they were able to borrow material for their projects and for their interests. And I don't think that's right. I'm sure we were all in high school once, and if you had $40, I'm sure you weren't buying a library card with it, because I know I was not going to be doing that. Clothes and shoes and such like that. But at any rate, so Brantford Public Library was that was our first one, and they hosted the Six Nations Public Library at their branch, and we had a little party celebrating this partnership. One of the great things that they did, and something to think about, is that they asked for different traditional artists to come and do different things. So we had beading and leatherworking workshops. And so community members from Six Nations went on that day to the celebration, and they had some beading and leather material workshops. Sorry, I'm looking behind me. I had my leather item there, but I guess I wore it and I took it home. Anyhow, so that was really good, because that was getting the community involved and out into the Brantford Public Library. And it was nice that they had a celebration, because that was an exciting part. But the other side of that was that these artists that came from Six Nations, they were given an honorarium to go and to participate, and Brantford Public Library paid for all of the supplies for their members to come to the celebration to take part in these in this the celebration and then the artistry that went on with it. So I think that's a really important part, because this is traditional knowledge, and it's unique and it's ours. And so it's very nice that Brantford recognized that and was able to offer honorariums to these artists. So therein, showing that for us, it's a different value, but the way they could honor that was to provide a monetary honorarium, and that's how they showed that it was valuable to that library as well. So I mentioned we had a partnership with County of Brent, and also with the Hamilton Public Library. And so in having the Hamilton Public Library's partnership, that was working with Lisa Weaver there. She came to the Six Nations Public Library, and we had a discussion, and I showed her all of the different things, the different aspects of the library. And so, always leaving with, if there's any help that they can offer, just let them know. And that's always nice and kind to make that offer. As our relationship sort of grew and developed with Hamilton Public, they, how you buy so many bestsellers per branch, depending on how many people are on hold. So when you have to buy that, and of course it's Hamilton Public, so it's a lot larger than the Six Nations. And so we only have, the physical and the virtual branch, of course, but those extra copies, once they're over 3 months old, they're no longer considered bestsellers, but they are good books. So Hamilton Public will pull those off of the shelves and then give those to Six Nations Public Library, and we put them in our catalog, and we totally use we just cross out their name. We totally use their barcode, and they're covered and they're great like that. So it saves us a lot of work. All we have to do is scan it and the information is there. We just have to change a little bit of the information, but that's really helpful because for this partnership, the Hamilton Public Library supporting the Six Nations Public Library by offering essentially new material after 3 months. That's still some good reading there. And so the Six Nations Public Library was then able to adjust our budgets so that we didn't have to buy or put so much of our very, very meager budget into buying new books, because we're getting virtually new books from Hamilton. And that was just an idea she had to see if that was going to be a good idea. The other thing that Hamilton did is, and we hope that it comes back, but COVID, of course, and we're all taking things very gentle as we sort of navigate out of this side of COVID. But we had, their bus, the bookmobile, I couldn't remember what it was called. The bookmobile from Hamilton would come to Six Nations Public Library every other Friday from, I think it was 10 until noon or 1 o'clock. And so with your reciprocal borrowing, and so community members of Six Nations could then go online and request material from Hamilton, and it would be delivered to the Six Nations Public Library. They would also have in their bookmobile a collection of interesting materials that community members who had the time available could then go and look on the bus. But the material would be delivered to the library, and so we would take it and we would hold it for those members who wanted those materials. And then when they were done, they would return it back to the Six Nations Library. When the bookmobile came back, then it would then be delivered back to Hamilton. And so it was a nice tidy process, and it showed a genuine interest and a way to assist that it wasn't it doesn't create a burden of this library system, again, because we're small, there's not many of us to work, and there's so much that work that needs to be done and that we want to do. So sort of hearing where there could be potentially an opportunity to assist and trying to figure out how resources from a municipal public library could then be used to support a First Nation public library in a good way. The other example of the Hamilton Public Library, was during COVID, and I went to go, so sometimes the books are delivered, the bestsellers are delivered, and sometimes I would just go and pick them up, especially during COVID. Lisa and I worked that out, and I was mentioning with me of people who applied to Hamilton that might want to come and work at the Six Nations Public Library, because I needed a new staff member, and she was asking, what did I need to do? And we had this huge inventory of our shipping container, and so there was yes, the Six Nations Public Library has a shipping container full of over 350 bankers boxes of material, and that had to be inventoried. And so we went through it. We found two stories. Sorry. So we found that there was a large quantity of Indigenous material and archives that was in the shipping container, and it was through our partnership with Brantford Public and County of Brant. They sent staff members to come and help us sort through that. So that was another part of these partnerships. And so we found all of these Indigenous voices materials and all of these archives. And I was asking Lisa if she had any resumes, because I needed all of this material to be cataloged. And so she said, you know, don't worry about the resumes. What we will do, and if this works out well for you, is because it's COVID and people are from Hamilton Public were being sent to different departments within the municipality of Hamilton, I guess. She offered and said, why don't we send one of our staff, one of our catalogers to Six Nations to do that cataloging for you, and we will pay them, and they will just be sent to work at your library. And so that worked out really, really well. So that over that summer, Diana came and we cataloged, I say we, because I was here while she was doing it, but there was about over 1,500 items were cataloged and entered into our library system. And then then we knew what we had, and we have these archives. And now then, not only do we know what they are and where they are, but now they are in our catalog for everyone here on this call. So these archives and these materials that belong in our local history are all, they're all Indigenous materials, right? Indigenous voices, and or cover the topic of Indigenous peoples within Turtle Island. So they're not only very good for us to have, but they're extremely useful for the greater population. If anybody on here wants to come and check it out, you're free to come, and online as well. But these partnerships, these series of partnerships, they were not a burden, but they offered help in a way that I didn't have to go and say, can you help me? You know, like with my little handout, asking for a handout, but it didn't make me feel terrible or awful, but it was genuinely helpful for the library system and for our community to have these things and to have these offers of help, genuine help and assistance, but I guess not necessarily help, but support. They were very, very supportive of the library. So to go into a library and ask, well, what do you need? There's lots of stuff, and we don't have time to tell you all of the different things, but if you can ask or find out, how is the library system doing? How are things going? And then listen and see, how can I support? If there's a mention of a bit of a problem or an issue, how can my library system support what they're already doing? And how can I use, like, how can I think of a supportive role as opposed to saying, well, how can I help? Because that's a really open-ended question, and there's so much that is needed that, I mean, you'd have to have lots of time to sit down, and we're all short on time, I know that. But to be in communication, a lot of First Nation libraries have different Facebook sites, and that's a way that you can look at your local First Nation Public Library and see what they're doing, and see how can I further support what they're already doing with what we have to support them. And I think those is a really good way moving forward. So not necessarily creating kind of a burden on an already stressed and pressured library system, but hearing and understanding and how can I further support what is already being done, and not just how can I help, because again, that's a timely road. That's a time taker. At any rate, speaking of time, that's my time. I look forward to any questions, and you can give me a call if you're. I know that it's like I'm kind of shy sometimes, so I'd rather like just call somebody up and ask my question as opposed to like everybody in the world knowing what I'm curious about. So you're free to do that or email. I'm happy to work through these things. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And any feedback is always very good. Now I'll go.
Thank you so much, Heather.
So if I can, I have a few things that I thought of when both Karen and Feather were speaking. I know when I was the CEO at a First Nation library, Feather's 100% right. The questions that came to me were, we want to make a land acknowledgement. Tell us what to write. We want to buy books. Tell us what we should buy. And that's not the kind of thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about real partnership where both parties are coming together and doing something that's improving both communities. And it's a really simple program, but I know, and I'm going to call on Karen for this. I remember I don't remember when the year was, but it would have been like, 2015, 2014, when you were working as the CEO in your library, and we would have our networking meetings with the First Nation CEOs. You talked about the Scrabble program that you had going. Can you tell us a bit about that program?
Well, was still going when I left, but COVID put a nip in the bud. That started with us reaching out because we heard that Sutton Public Library had a Scrabble club and people that came every Sunday and played Scrabble. So we invited the Scrabble club to come to our library, and we called it a Scrabble potluck. So they would bring food, we'd have food, we'd sit and eat, and we'd play Scrabble. And that went on for many years. Two of the ladies that were regular coming have passed away. One was, we went to her 100th birthday before she passed away the next year. And the other lady that just passed away was 90 something. And we will miss them, but we still have we've always been in touch with that Scrabble people, and that started with our partnership with the Peterzowski branch of the Georgina Libraries, and it went on for years and years. So there is, and our members can go to any branch of Georgina Public Library and borrow books. It's just the way they are. They can borrow books. People from there can come and borrow books from us. There's no formal agreement. That's just how it is.
I always like the program because, Feather talked about the bigger, more complex relationship of somebody sending paid staff to your library to do work, which is phenomenal, but it might not be the reality of everybody in every day. But the aspect of getting another community to come to the island and experience and share and talk probably made such an impact in both communities that wasn't there. Those, mysticism of what the reserve is, that other place that's over on the other side of the water, you break it down and you realize like, we're just playing Scrabble together. So for me, that was one of those that I remember when you told, the story as we were going around, like, what program are you doing this year? And I said, man, that is just like such a solid opportunity to share well before we were talking about truth and reconciliation as a concept. So yeah, I love that program.
what was nice about it too is with it being a potluck too, we could, give them fry bread or, scone and some of our traditional foods during the potluck. And they would bring their favorite recipes. And we always had a wonderful time. And I don't know if they're still doing it, but I think they're trying to get it together. But the ladies, I still stay in touch with the ladies. So we are planning to do another Scrabble initiative over here with
Excellent.
them.
So when I was working at Six Nations, I did a program that was actually about the CEOs. And, we kind of looked where, Karen talked about programs, services, reciprocal aspects that were service to service and community to community. Feather talked about, library to library, which is interesting. And then I did one that was really CEO to CEO. And it was phenomenal for me at the time because I was a new CEO. I was a teacher, not a librarian by trade. So for me to be able to sit and meet with other CEOs and brainstorm ideas was such a fantastic support. And at the time, OLS had, or SOLS at the time, but the OLS has their meetings, and our area was one that actually didn't have a CEO meeting. So you had to really travel to get somewhere. So Six Nations Public Library, Brant County, Brantford, Haldeman County, and Norfolk County, the CEOs met quarterly. And it was really just a chat and nibble that, we sat down, we might have had a loose agenda, but it was, are there grant opportunities that we can all partner with? Are there program opportunities? What's happening in your community that's not being met? Reciprocal borrowing was one of those things that we started talking about way back then, because we had reciprocal borrowing with one community, not with other communities. Some boards wanted to do it. Some town councils or city councils or county council said no. And like people were sort of putting their voices in and kind of limiting where the CEOs were. So I, as a baby librarian, had the opportunity to learn from our more veterans. And they had an opportunity to learn some of our issues because they're talking about development charges, and I'm going, what's that? We don't have that on reserve. Where's that pot of money that I'm missing? So, they were able to see how some of our issues would be and how to raise funds, how to, deal with capital projects. I was able to learn from them some of the other pieces, and some meetings were very social where, you just met at a restaurant and it was, a 2-hour late lunch, and others were in the library where you really wanted to hit some pieces. They were able to share technology. And as we started talking, although it was about CEO to CEO relationships, partnerships grew out of that. Because we start talking about what I'm doing and they're saying, well, we have something similar. And I'm like, yep, I can't get to that level. And they say, well, we can support on that. Or what do you mean you don't have that e-resource? We can come up with a reciprocal borrowing because you're in the county. Six Nations is part of Brant County. We should be able to put you on to that e-resource, technically you're residents. So all of these types of things really just came out of, at the time, 5 women getting together and having a conversation. The world really can move with 5 women getting together over coffee or a glass of wine and making it work. And in this case, we got 4 of them right here. But, it's a different way of looking at, I think, this aspect of reconciliation. It can be a really complex reciprocal agreement that's approved by boards and, MOUs, and includes salaries and wages. It can be a really simple aspect of bringing people into your library and doing a program that they themselves are sharing. It can be reciprocal agreements, and it can be leadership coming together and just figuring out where are the gaps, where are people falling through the cracks. Through those meetings, that's when we realized that our high school students weren't being served by either community because the school board thought that Six Nations was doing something. And Six Nations thought that since the school board was in Brantford, it was being handled there. And in the meantime, we realized we had a huge gap for our high school students being unserved. And we came together and found ways of doing it. Some of them were Band-Aids until we could get to bigger aspects. And I know Feathers made those inroads, but you know, it's communication. And all of this comes down to two people or more sitting in a room and actually having a conversation. Those relationships. I think all of our speakers talked about relationships.
And just to add, Sabrina, we still do that.
Yeah.
Those meetings are still being held by those. We have Brantford, County of Brant, and the three of us for a little while with Six Nations, and now then Norfolk is coming on board for those little, just meetings that we're all close. We're very close, the population we share, and so it's nice. And then it's also nice to sort of work out if you have little problems in your library that you have other people that you can talk to, that that's a built relationship that I talk about my kids. I talk about my kids all the time, but they know who my kids are. I know who their kids are, and so it's not just work and library, but it's also you establish those relationships that are beyond work, and now then you're talking about how you place in the world, and so. So we still do that, Sabrina. So good job starting it, because we've carried it on. And so many years later, we continue. And I think it's very, very important, because then it's very comfortable to share the real, the real dramas of the library world, as opposed to trying to make it sound really great. Sometimes you do that with new people. You try to make it sound not as bad, but we can just really get into the nitty gritty and be our real authentic selves and, lay it on the line. And so then the others are there to help look at these problems and offer genuine solutions, to try. Some things I can't think of everything. And so it's very nice. I would encourage everyone to try to get these relationships going. It's a lovely time. It's time well spent as well. And you get paid at the same time. So it's a real win-win all around, eating and chatting.
And when we started it, I was the baby librarian. I was the new CEO. But since then, every single CEO has turned over in all 5 of those libraries. So there's been new CEOs that have come in the county systems, in the city systems, at your library, at Six Nations, that have been the new face at the table. And that meant that they had the opportunity to not have to start over, not have to make that inroad out to another, that phone call to get it started, because it was there. I know, Karen has been really good at always being an outreach person, as one of our leaders in First Nation public libraries for decades, that, you ran much of, that show. When I came in, you were the person that I went to.
And I was always trying to give all my positions away to have.
I took them and then I passed many on to Feather.
Yes,
three generations here. But it's, if we wait for the relationships to happen naturally, especially during COVID, and now when we're all kind of a little bit more landlocked than we used to be, they don't happen. You have to wait for that phone call. So trying to get these types of things going, these partnerships, and northern communities are in, a totally different situation, because your northern reserve may be hours from the nearest public library branch. So, for the northern people who are here, we have learned how to telecommute. Like, oh my goodness, we are Zoomaholics now. So don't feel that you have to wait. Or if you're a southern library and you want to get a sister library up north, like, go for it. You can do the same things, where you're chatting and you're conversing. You might not get your community to share spaces in the same way, but we as First Nation people are very welcoming and want to have these conversations and want to build our communities and help our people that are in your communities. So these are relationships just ripe for the picking. You just have to make that first call. And then once it's there, Feather benefited because she walked into one that was there and then got new librarians and new CEOs at those other branches, other library systems just falling into it. And here we are, 15 years later with the same meetings happening. So, that's the kind of natural ability that you can do by just building a relationship. And out of that is where the reconciliation comes. Out of that is where these natural relationships can happen. You're much more likely to reach out to somebody that you already have a relationship with for a partnership than the cold call to build something new. But it's not an excuse. You still got to make that cold call if you're not doing it right now. Anything that anyone else had to add or ideas?
I think that this has been a fantastic session, and I think that many are going to benefit from attending. And I think it's very good that it's recorded, because people can come back if they can't come to the actual session when we will be live and answering questions, but they can at least come back and get this information, because it's very key. And the role of relationships with Indigenous people it's paramount. We're not, well, obviously we don't trust very easy. I think history has really taught us that in so many different ways. And it's still continuing to this day, right? But to try and work forward to foster a relationship, I think is, that's the way that it has to be. If you want to move forward in a good way, we have to have their personal relationships is what needs to be established, because that's what we understand as a people. We understand the
Has
personal.
everybody gotten that one word? Relationships, like that is the key word. Truth and reconciliation is becoming a rhetoric. And like, we need to understand that. Like, everyone's like, oh yes, TRC, truth and reconciliation, but it's relationships.
Mhm.
Truth is changing what you know to be true and being willing to hear. So we know that. And reconciliation is, how do we rebuild? How do we grow? But it all comes down to relationships. Like, it's all
Knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge of each other. True knowledge.
Personally, I've really enjoyed pivoting from viewing truth and reconciliation as how we can support Indigenous peoples in our communities, to focusing on how we can build partnerships with Indigenous peoples in our communities. And I think that that's a really key point to take away from today's session, is that to incorporate truth and reconciliation, you really need to work with our First Nations public libraries, instead of just having that relationship be a one-way relationship. Thank you so much, everyone, ladies, for all of your knowledge and your wisdom today. We will be having our live Q&A session. So this is where our recording will end, and it will be available on our website for those of us who couldn't join us here today and those who want to watch again.
Yeah.